So why do we swear?
There isn't one reason, because the common denominator of swearing is simply arousing emotion in your listener by the use of a word. And there are lots of reasons that people may want to arouse emotion in their listener. One of them is to remind the listener of how awful or emotional something is. So if I'm a nurse in a doctor's office, I might say we need a stool sample, not we need a shit sample, because I need to refer to it somehow, but there's no reason for us to think about how offensive it is. But if someone is letting his dog foul my lawn, I might say, clean up your dog shit, where I want to remind him that this is an offensive substance. So one is just, do you want to emphasize the negative aspects of a phenomenon, or do you want to hide them? Another reason is you may want to just arouse your listener's attention. If you think that your listener is just doesn't care, if you say close the fucking door, just the fact that fucking is an arousing word means he listens a little more, and he thinks that you mean business, that you're serious about it. Those are two of the main reasons.
When I hit my finger instead of the nail.
Well, that's a third one, and I think that's a different, yet another phenomenon. I think it partly comes from a reflex that we inherited from other animals, where if we're suddenly injured or an animal is suddenly injured or confined, it will erupt in a furious struggle accompanied by a loud noise. And presumably that was a reflex of defense against being injured by another animal. I think we've inherited that reflex, but in our case, we have this extra language system that's in our brain that also controls our vocal tract. So instead of just going, ah, we articulate our yelp with a word that we ordinarily inhibit ourselves from producing, and a word that is connected with negative emotion.
You also write about violence, about the evolution of violence in history. Your thesis is there's less violence now than there used to be. Can you explain that?
Yes, by many measures, and some of them we can know just by opening up a history book. The number of capital crimes has diminished to zero in most countries. I live in one of the few industrial countries that does have capital punishment. Here we still have it for murder in 2/3 of the states, but in Europe it's gone. And it used to be you could have capital punishment for insulting the king, insulting the religion, spreading gossip, shoplifting. The way the capital punishment, or punishment in general, is carried out has changed. In Europe in the Middle Ages there were horrific forms of torture and mutilation that are gone. But more quantitatively, the rate of homicide in every European country has plummeted since the Middle Ages, reduced by a factor of between 10 and 100. Since World War II, the number of interstate wars and deaths from interstate wars has gone down. More recently, since the end of the Cold War, in around 1990, the number of civil wars has gone down, a number of genocides. So we seem to be in a midst of trends of trying to move away from violence, and it is a profound puzzle, a mystery, why that should be happening.
What's the relation between your language studies and your study of violence, for instance?
Oh, human nature. What makes us tick? What's a human being? Language has been relevant to that at least since the late 1950s, when Noam Chomsky, my former colleague at MIT, argued that humans have an innate capacity to acquire language, that the human mind is not just a homogeneous learning device that just soaks up information from the environment, but that we are programmed with certain cognitive abilities. Well, that leads to the question, if language is a human instinct, what are the other human instincts? What are our emotions? What are our cognitive abilities? If there is a human nature with many parts and faculties, does that mean we're doomed to repeat our behavior without changing through history? Well, clearly not, because we have changed. What are the aspects of human nature that first of all, make violence very probable throughout human history, but that also admit an opening for gradually reducing it in some places and times?
What's the mystery of the mind that preoccupies you most right now? What is this mystery you want to solve?
Well, right this minute, it's what allows us to become less violent. More generally, I've been interested in how children acquire language. When we use language, we don't blurt out what we say literally in so many words, but use euphemism and innuendo. In the past, I've been interested in how verbs work, why some verbs are transitive and others are intransitive, and why there are irregular forms. Why isn't language perfectly logical with a rule for everything? Why in almost every language are there forms that you just have to memorize? In English, bring brought instead of bring bringed. Lots of mysteries, no shortage of mysteries.
Does it all boil down to the question, how does the mind work?
Yes. Well, with violence, though, it's an interaction between how the mind works and historical changes, technological changes, particular events in world history that set us in this direction or that direction. So it's not purely a psychological question. I'm interested in the psychological component, but to answer it, one also has to look at chance events through history.
How does academia look at your work about dirty words, for instance?
Oh, no problem. I think one of the wonderful things about academia is whatever subject it is, there's someone somewhere who studies it. I occasionally have gotten a response when I talk about it in public. Do you have to use those words? And my answer is yes. I'm a psychologist and a linguist. If we have an emotional reaction to some word, I think we should all step aside and ask, why do we have that reaction? We shouldn't just have that reaction and surrender to it, saying, it makes me feel bad and that's good enough reason not to use it. We should be curious about ourselves. And part of that is hearing the words, gauging our own reaction, asking, why do I react that way to that word? And if you use a euphemism, if I were to say, why are we offended by the F word, instead of why are we offended by fuck, it's not communicating the problem clearly.
Still, you draw a line in your book. There's some expressions and words you relegate to the notes.
Oh, I think some of that, there was a short discussion of bestiality that I thought, as a matter of taste, I put in the footnote. It also allowed me to pretend to have at least some remnant of propriety left after this long chapter of using many of the words very often.
You write learned books, but you also write articles, you give interviews, you write popular science books. Why do you do that? What's your message?
Oh, our message is we can try to solve mysteries. We can try to understand ourselves. We don't have to just accept our own reactions, other people's behavior as miracles, as unpredictable, brute facts about the world. We can try to get insight, we can illuminate them, and I think that's a good thing.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.